Good evening. This is Civil Discourse Now for September 13th, 2022. It's we're almost into autumn, and things are just happening on such an interesting basis in this state, in this country, but especially locally. It goes out of the universe because we're on the internet. So, a local preacher, Micah Beckwith, is kind of like, he's like a gift that keeps giving, VD, Valentine's Day. It's just he keeps coming up with stuff, or somebody will say, you know what he said back then, and it's just amazing. Now, to his credit, well, I can't really say anything, but I will say this about Beckwith. He's been kind of consistent, but some of the stuff isn't too nice. Most of it isn't too nice. For example, he had a picture, there's a picture of Hamilton County women sitting in front of a Confederate flag, and he has defended their right to show their heritage. It's the Confederate flag, and that's kind of troublesome because I'll get to that in a minute. When President Biden, by the way, president nominated for the Supreme Court Judge Brown Jackson, Beckwith said, let's be honest, the only reason she was chosen was because of her sex and color of her skin, not because of her qualifications. Let's see. She was like honors student, graduated tops of her classes in undergrad and law school, and has been a federal judge. I'm glad he's consistent on that. Coney Barrett, who's on the court, had no prior experience as a lawyer in court trying cases. Now Justice Brown Jackson had, and I'm glad there's no allegation that any white male on the court ever has been chosen to be on the court because of the color of his skin or his sex. I know that when we were at nationals in 1975, I believe, Duke University's team said something to the effect that the only people we were quoting were blacks, Indians, and other radicals. I started laughing really hard, and my partner had to pull me back. So we did okay. Anyways, so I was thinking about this. It's like all this stuff coming up with Mr. Beckwith, and especially when he was talking about, how this is the racial thing is something being brought up. And it's just, he's going to own the libs every turn, especially by bringing up something about race. And I felt it was necessary to channel the spirits of people from the Deep South and their secession statements issued prior to the Civil War. Now, realize, of course, that the Civil War, many people claim, was brought about because the Southern states simply wanted to assert their states' rights. If you've ever read the Declaration of Independence, it's rather an interesting short document, but at the beginning it says basically that government is founded and people have rights, and they delegate those rights to government. There's no mention of government having any rights. So states don't have rights. But let's get more to what the Southern states did have to say at the time that they seceded from the Union. And I'm going to start with the first of the four states that issued full secession statements, and that was Georgia. Georgia said the Republican Party, with reference to African slavery, was going to cost the South $3 billion in property because they owned all those slaves. It was going to really disrupt their business. So the good thing about them going for the rights of states, they have a lot of money. Now, Texas, of course, we're going to the bottom of the barrel when we're looking at people and oppression of people. And Texas has some of the people down there are really pushing for oppression, and some people definitely aren't these days. But back then, Texas said it was received as a state protecting Negro slavery and servitude of the African race to the white race. That's just really a very progressive stand, and really kind of harkens to the idea that maybe critical race theory, although it's not taught in our public schools, that It teaches that the structures of our government were created to favor white supremacy over other races. That might be something that has a kernel of truth. No colonels involved in this, just generals or members of the political establishment. Then we go to the state of Mississippi. Now, Mississippi and we're going to talk about discrimination or racial hatred. You got to bring in Mississippi. And because Phil Oakes' song said, "Here's the land you tore out the heart of. Mississippi, found yourself another country to be part of." And Mississippi always hangs in there on these things. You got to give them credit on that. Mississippi said slavery. Labor is none but the black race can stand exposure to the tropical sun. I guess they had some really advanced biological geniuses down there in Mississippi coming up with those insights. Then we have South Carolina. That's the fourth one, and I bring it up last. Because South Carolina had so many things going for it, going into the Civil War. For one thing, South Carolina had tried to secede before. For another, the majority of its population was slaves. Now, only 3/5 of them counted, but when you're sitting there looking at a slave rebellion, as they were really concerned a lot, because they thought African slaves were going to get really angry and put them in the position that the African slaves had been in for all these years. What would they do then? But South Carolina said it was the right of property in slaves that was recognized in the Constitution originally. So when we look at these times and we realize those were the sentiments of the Confederacy and Confederate States when they committed treason and seceded from the Union, it was only because of economics and racial hatred. Now, what happened afterwards was, we know the Republican Party had come to prominence in the Union. And after the Civil War, we're taught in our classes, or at least we were in junior high and high school, that really slavery was about to come to an end. And Reconstruction didn't really work because there were so many people angry in the South that it was not going to work at all. Actually, none of those statements is true. Slavery was not about to come to an end. They were saying that at the time of the Constitutional Convention. And 1860 came around, still existed. It was still more profitable to outright own a human being than to pay them dirt wages. And then to say that Reconstruction hadn't worked. In fact, it had worked in a lot of places. People were becoming adjusted to dealing with one another as equals, trying to rebuild everything around them. Even Major League Baseball in its infancy had integration. So I've got to say this. When I read anything, I know that a couple of people there on Twitter are starting to track Micah Beckwith's insightful or deep statements about such things. Whenever I see that, I'm pretty well convinced that we should keep an eye on people like that, see what they're saying. It's important to understand. The things that he says are statements made from ignorance, and especially about the history of the United States and about our Constitution. We've got a long ways to go here, but the way in which we've seen things stacked by a few years of right-wing hatred in office is, can't accept that at all. I'm Mark Small. I'm the Republican Party nominee for Indiana House District 86 here in Indiana. I'm anti-gun, pro-separation of church and state, pro-civil rights, pro-environment, pro-choice, and our country's in deep doo-doo. Peace, love, happiness. Take care.